Just checking to make sure it was in fact an HDMI cable. Alright, let's make sure. Talk to my computer. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know we're lined up against a VR event, so I know this is a sacrifice. I'd like to start by asking a question. How many people here are educators today? Like, you teach a class, you have a classroom, okay, some, and people who want to teach in the future. Okay. People who are designers, you are interested in making educational games, a couple of those too. Oh, quite a few of those, sure. And I see there's a couple people who are wearing multiple hats. I saw a couple of hands go up twice. If you are here because you had an empty 2 o'clock slot and you needed somewhere to rest your feet, I've been that person at a conference. You are also welcome. I'm Tom Sarachan, and this talk is called The Right Job for the Tool. My hope is that what we can do together is talk a little bit about what, in my experience and the experience of my colleagues who are teachers, games teach reliably. Because, the instructors in the room know you're always coming up to the next assessment. You're always coming up to the test that's coming, the standardized test that's coming, the presentation that's coming. So things need to work the first time. You can't go back and teach it again. And what, in our experience, games have not reliably taught. Things where some other tool would have been better, so that you can avoid stepping on the landmine that we all stepped on. In addition, so for instructors, my hope is that this will help you choose the right tool for your objectives. And for designers, you will be able to choose projects that are the most likely to succeed, and to talk with your clients, whether that client is someone who is paying you, a colleague who says, I need some help, I want to make a thing to improve a class, or yourself. You are the instructor and you're thinking, okay, last year, week 3 was really boring in this class. I need something better to do in week 3. You'll know the right places to use games as a tool in teaching. A little bit about me. I used to be a public defender. There came a time in my life where my wife said to me, you're too young to be going to the doctor with chest pains. You need to do something different with your life. That was very kind of her, both because she was supporting me and making a big change, and because she was asserting that I was still young. So I went to the NYU Game Center and got a Master of Fine Arts in Game Design, and now I teach at Harrisburg University of Science and Technology. And in that role, I've done a bunch of educational games. This was a game about economic development in the North American Arctic, an area where there is not a lot of transportation infrastructure, there is a lot of climate change, and how people wrestle with these challenges. A game about the Washington Conference of 1959, this cool Cold War moment where the United States and the Soviet Union teamed up to stop a fight. And it actually worked. And how did that happen? Why did the two great powers come together at this one moment to say, we have to cool it, and we have to make sure that everybody else is cooling it too? And just recently, a game about being an appellate court and understanding the role of the courts in defining civil liberties and in putting boundaries on civil liberties. Why would this ever happen? How do they decide where it should happen? And the lessons that have come out of this for me and for my colleagues, there's really 2 key takeaways. We found that games are really good at teaching dynamics, and we'll get into what that means. They have consistently been very bad at teaching data, and we'll get into what that means too. But this is kind of the key break point that we have seen in whether a game is the right tool or whether a game is going to lead to an unengaged class, everybody frustrated, including the teacher, because now I got to teach it again, and now we're behind on the syllabus, and everything is bad. So To define the terms, dynamics. What I mean by dynamics is just a system where things interact. Often the things are people. The big three at the Yalta conference. You know, Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt are getting together. They are going to argue with each other, and they are going to define what does the post-war world look like. We're pretty sure we're going to win. What happens after that? In Greenland, it turns out that Greenland has a lot of rare earth minerals, the stuff that goes into making a phone. However, it is also still a part of Denmark, and Denmark controls Greenland's international relations. This is awkward if your game plan for economic development is sell your rare earth minerals to places like China. Because Denmark, it turns out, has a huge opinion about whether you should do things like mine uranium and sell it to places that are not Denmark. The genocide in Rwanda. The UN fails to stop this, even though there are many players in the system who could have stopped it. Why? Why do they fail? And then there's data. The information you need to understand the context. I think of this sometimes as the inputs to the system. So, who's on which side of World War II? In order to understand the Yalta Conference, you need to know that the Cold War has not started yet and Russia is kind of a friend. You can't assume necessarily that people know this, right? Maybe they learned it at some point, like it's all gotten a little fuzzy. You gotta make sure it's clear before you get into the Yalta Conference, or you are gonna get a really weird Yalta Conference. You have to know that there are valuable rare earth metals in Greenland, and there is very little transportation infrastructure. Because if you don't know that second part, it's like, well, I don't know, just mine it all, right? And Greenland is super rich, and it's so easy. Why would you not just do this? Well, you know, the reason is that for like months out of the year, you can't even get food into Greenland's like supermarkets, because just all transport into and out of Greenland is incredibly difficult. So you're proposing that we're going to take huge amounts of stuff out of the ground and ship it somewhere? Like, that sounds dangerous. Now that you know. Where is Rwanda? You have to know something about the geography to understand why the countries in the UN are reacting to the crisis there as they are. You need to understand this. No, work, advance. Phone, you have never failed me up to now. No, what? Thank you. There is no classroom where the technology is reliable. But you have to know this to understand why information is not getting to these people reliably, why it's coming out in a slow and fragmented way. So why are games good at teaching dynamics? I hesitate to make assertions about what games are or what they're good at, but I think generally it's safe to say games are good at modeling systems. Most games are all about taking a system and surfacing the interesting and rewarding interactions in it. So, Gone Home is this really interesting game about solving a mystery. And it's not a murder mystery, it's a mystery about where is your family? You came home from school, from travel, nobody's there to greet you. That's weird. The house is dark. That's weird. Where is everybody? And in Gone Home, the important interactions are things like picking up family pictures, because the game is all about your family's relationships and how those relationships broke down while you were gone. SimCity 2000 is a map game at some fundamental level, right? And so it's all about congestion and traffic. It has this very detailed model of whether people will use mass transit or insist on driving a car even though the roads are congested. It's really good for understanding that. It does not include school board politics. As a parent, I care a lot about school board politics. School board politics is not fun, and it's hard to represent on a map. So it's not included here. It's interesting, maybe it's rewarding, but it's not interesting and rewarding within the context of this model. This is a model about something else. Okay. And educational games are exactly the same. You can surface the stuff that is important to your learning objective, that is relevant to what you're trying to do in class. So if you're at the Yalta conference and you're teaching a class on international politics, you can say we're studying the big three. What does Churchill want? What does Roosevelt want? What does Stalin want? How are they pushing against each other? You know, I went to college at a school that has a hotel and hospitality major. You could model something completely different here, and it would be just as valid. You are in charge of an international event with people from many cultures. They're going to be here for days, and you have to keep them happy, right? Like, that's hard. You know, there's a real thing to measure here, but you can build a model to do whatever you need to do to surface the most important stuff for you. And furthermore, one of the great things about systems is you can change the inputs. So here, the problem for this city is that an alien spider monster has arrived, and it is walking through the city. But you could have a different input as your problem. Your problem could be, thank you. We built our city in the mouth of a volcano. So now, this is a totally different input, and it gives us totally different outputs as we try to solve this problem. So you can understand the model of a city in different ways depending on what you're putting into the city. And you understand the constraints of urban environments and their advantages in different ways. And again, it's just the same on an educational basis. Yalta, as a study of international politics, looks one way if these three people are your players. If you put in Leventi Beria, the head of the NKVD, the head of the secret police in the Soviet Union, oh, now it looks way different. Because now the system is kind of all about not making this person angry because he will definitely put you in the gulag. And it becomes different again if this is another one of your inputs. If you're thinking about Alger Hiss, now you not only have the big three pushing on each other, and you not only have the input issue of, I put someone into the system who, on a domestic level, is constraining your options at the conference. But now we're also thinking about, after the conference, what happens. You can maybe make a deal if you have to go home and sell it. Now you have a different problem. Any of these are okay. And it's all about, as an instructor, what is the thing you're trying to get across. Now we have data. And as a first cut, it might seem weird to say that games are bad at teaching data. Because actually people learn a huge amount of data to teach games, or to learn to play games. You know, this is a map of how Pokemon interact with each other in Pokemon Go. And you know, people just know this. And people know stuff that's way harder than this. Like children, small children, are like, you know, Mr. Sarachan, like, you know, that's this kind of Pokemon, and the problem is that it's taking half damage to this other kind of Pokemon, and it has this move, and Mr. Sarachan, it's very kind of you to try to play this game, but really you're too old and not cool enough. You know, so people they learn a ton of data to play games. But in the classroom, the problem I've run into again and again, and this is the landmine, is the people who like the game will invest in learning the data. But there's no game that everybody likes. The mistake that I see instructors making again and again, and I've made it, I'm not better than anybody else, is you think, okay, this is a game, so people are going to like it. So people are going to put in the work to play. That last sentence is absolutely wrong. And it is wrong very predictably because they don't like the thing. Sometimes they don't like it because they're like, look, I like games, but this is not the kind of game I like. So I am not going to invest in playing it. Sometimes they say, look, I know that in a weird philosophical sense, it is debatable whether this is a game. Because, philosophers of play say that play is voluntary, right? Well, this isn't voluntary, it's a classroom. I'm going to do this because you're making me. And so even if I do like this kind of thing in the abstract, I don't like it in this context, because this is false. But what happens is, there's always some people who don't want to play. There's always some people who are not engaged. And when they are not engaged, two bad things happen. First, they don't learn the data. Because why would they? They don't want to play. And second, because they don't learn the data, they can't operate the system. They don't have access to the inputs. So they don't have access to the output, so they don't get anything out of this at all. That doesn't mean there's no hope. It does mean you have to structure things differently. So for educators, my experience has been games reliably help students understand dynamics. There was just an excellent talk by, I believe her name is Jane Ball. She was in the other room. If you weren't there, I encourage you, go look it up. Go look up the recording. It was amazing. And she talked a lot about the way that she uses games in her high school classes to teach things like the Red Scare. And to teach things like, in the early Middle Ages, why did people adopt a feudal system, even though it seems like a feudal or a manorial system is really terrible for everyone involved, and everyone wishes they could do something different. Like, how do you get to a point where even though everyone hates this, this is what they're doing? These kinds of dynamics, games are great. Some people will get invested in the data. It will happen. There will be some people who are like, this is so cool. And now I'm really into it. And I'm reading about the medieval period so that I can out-argue people when someone says, I want to send out 3 people on trading missions. And I can be like, no, you need at least 5 people for a trading mission. Because I know actually what went into a medieval trading mission. And I can tell you that one person has to be, I don't know, I don't know anything about medieval trading. But not everyone will. So, you have to supplement with other forms of instruction. You have to go in with the confidence that students have the data they need. And you're an educator, so you know how to do this. Right? Like giving people information in interesting ways and engaging ways. This is something educators have been working on for a long time. You can absolutely get people to the point where they have enough inputs to operate the system. But understand that you can't just hand people the game and say, this is going to be so amazing, you're going to love it, ergo read these pages in the textbook. That is not going to fly. Your class will be super boring that day. I guarantee you. I've had some super boring classes that day. And those games were really cool. But it didn't matter. For designers, I encourage you to work with educators. There's a big push in education for interactive classrooms and for games in the classroom. And that means 2 things. First, you're going to run into educators who view it as a sort of panacea. I have been told this is great and will work. It's important to help them understand this is what you can really expect out of it. In addition, you are helping them justify to their superiors, who often will see games as a panacea because they are people pushing it, right? You are helping them to have an informed conversation with whoever's in charge of them about this is why I'm running my classroom this way. This is why there is still lecture happening in my class, even though you told me that I shouldn't have lectures anymore, that everything should be games. Help the educators you are working with understand what needs to be taught. Because some things, unfortunately, so far as we know, so far as I know, still do. And think holistically about the game will fit into the class. Part of the benefit of working with somebody is that they can be a collaborator. And so you can say, look, tell me about your classroom. Tell me what you need. Tell me what you want the game to teach and what you want the inputs and the data to be. In different classrooms, there's going to be different expectations about what people can come in knowing. And so you can understand better, okay, this is the amount of data that people are going to have, this is the type of data that people are going to have, ergo, this is the kind of system that will get the dynamics out best. It's way different to make a thing for a primary school class than it is for a higher education class. That's not bad. It's just factually there is a different thing happening there. And if you're working with someone and treating them as a collaborator, you can build something that will work better for them. So you need to know what canons should be taught outside the game. There's also a cool thing you can do sometimes, depending on how much time they have to give you. And the answer is never as much as you would like, because no educator ever has as much time as they would like. But potentially there's the opportunity to create something that builds, and to treat the data for one game as the output of a previous game. I haven't seen this done often, but when it is done, I can tell you it's amazing. And it's amazing even in very small amounts. Students are like every other game player, every other comic book reader, every follower of novel series. Everybody, in a funny way, loves continuity. And if you can create a sense that the thing I did was relevant to something that is happening down the road, that is very powerful. And students absolutely, in my experience, do hop on board with that. So if one game is about understanding how you get into a feudal system, if you can turn that understanding into the data that is feeding into something down the road, that's really great. I did some economics simulations that were about running a recording studio. And even the smallest amount of carryover, whoever has the most money at the end of this week gets some advantage in the following week. Not even you get to keep your money, but you get some advantage. It was hugely motivational. It did a huge amount to increase engagement. These are the credits for the images I have used because I felt bad about not crediting them, even though this form of crediting is very poor. This is how to get in touch with me. One thing that was brought up at the previous panel was that there is not a lot of crosstalk between educators and designers. I believe that is primarily a problem of time, because I know a lot of educators who are interested in this stuff but don't have time to pursue it. And I know a lot of designers who wish they could be designing something that was of benefit to a larger community, but they are often freelancers who are trying to pound the pavement in order to get the next gig going. So I will tell you, that's my professional email. If you are an educator or a designer, I am happy to respond to it. I'm more than happy to put my time into making these connections as much as I can. I'd like to finish just really quickly by saying, again, I'm not better than anybody else. I'm only bringing up these landmines because I have stepped on them. And in fact, I stepped on them 2 weeks ago in the appellate court game that I talked about at the very beginning. I had to go back and reteach how the court system fits together. Because the first thing a lot of my students did was say, well, look, the problem here is that I don't believe that this person did the thing they are accused of doing. So I think the real problem is they weren't guilty in the first place. So why are we studying the limits of the Fourth Amendment? The problem is that the Fourth Amendment was clearly violated. And I had to go back and say, no, you're not allowed to revisit the facts as an appellate court. That's not your role. Let's talk about what your role is. It's amazing how quickly your assumptions about data people have get you into trouble. And so, I encourage you really think carefully about what data do you think people have, and have you really thoroughly prepared people. Thank you very much. We have just a couple minutes for questions. Please.
So what do you think the best example is of it?
The best example of?
A game that works in this context.
So I have been very impressed with some of the games coming out of the Reacting to the Past series. Like, they have a game about Yalta. They have a game about Rwanda and the UN failing to respond effectively. Those games do require a certain amount of preparation, and preparation in the classical sense of, we are going to teach you what Churchill wants out of the Yalta Conference. That Britain is trying, arguably, to reestablish its empire. And there's documents, and there's background reading, there's all this stuff that you as an instructor will go through. But then the end game is, they come out of the conference saying, okay, now I really get it. Now I get why people were willing to make these compromises and go against their own position. The Rwanda game, again, like, you gotta get them through the UN Charter on genocide, but at the end of it, they come out of that game like, what is the Security Council doing? I didn't understand what the UN was about before, now I understand, and I'm super mad that France was voting against intervention again and again and again. I understand why they have the power to do that. I understand why they wanted to do that, and I also understand the moral implications of that choice. Please.
It seems like there's a correlation to like tutorializing in games, and like a game for education, a game that does a bad job tutorializing will just show you a controller with like lines to what the actions are, and a better one will have you do those things, and like you need to be able to jump to get past this part of the level. Like Mario 1-1 does a great job at that. So it seems like, is there a better way to have an educational game, like incorporate the learning of the data as the ramp up to the game itself, like as part of the game design, as opposed to a lecture?
So one thing that I've found is, if you have like a big overarching point, but that requires a lot of understanding to deal with, you can break that up. So in the economics game about the recording studio, the idea was the first thing we're going to do is just pricing. All we're engaging with is, how do you pick a price? And then from there you can build up to, okay, now that you understand that, we're going to understand the next economics content. We're going to build that in, and we're going to build the next thing in. My experience has been that makes the classroom more manageable, because a little more reliably what people know going into it and what people know coming out of it. And it does enable you to build up to something big. But somewhere along the line, you still have to teach why prices are the way they are. And if your thinking is, I'm just gonna let them have the insight, it's hard to be sure that everybody's having the insight. And come test time, ideally everybody's had the insight. And maybe this is another area where different people learn in different ways. And you have to be a little bit attentive to that as well. Everybody has to come out of the tutorial ready to play the game. Right. Some people are gonna read the manual. Some people are gonna play through the tutorial. But nobody playing Overwatch can play if they don't know how to use keyboard and mouse at the same time. However it is you're gonna get that across. All right, I apologize, it is 2:30. Thank you so much. If you want to talk more, please come find me. Thank you so much.